Hi, Father Ian Van Heusen here. So I want to get into St. Alphonsus Ligouri and his understanding of does an invincibly erroneous conscience merit grace? But I want to talk about a recent story with leadership. So one of the big things I try to instill in student leaders is their willingness to speak their mind and to, not, I don't want to say challenge authority, like fight the man kind of thing. I think those kind of ideas are a little bit played out, but what I try to encourage in them is the sense that what I need as a leader and what leadership always needs is we need that healthy criticism, that healthy sense of trying to poke holes in things, seeing things from different angles, trying to see the possible mistakes and pitfalls. So what you have to really help young people to do is be willing to speak out when they see something they disagree with and not just go with the flow. Because one of the real dangers for an organization is what they often psychologists call groupthink. So there has to be a tendency that you have to instill in leaders their willingness to speak out when their conscience dictates. So I had a young leader, freshman, actually sophomore this year. She was a freshman last year, first year on leadership. And I think she had a lot of things that were kind of building. She wasn't speaking her mind. She wasn't talking about the things that she disagreed with until she finally wrote everything out. She had been very frustrated. She wrote out a bunch of things that she disagreed with that I was doing, and she kind of presented it. And what occurred to me was what a powerful moment that must have been for her in her life. Because you have to figure, as a sophomore in college, she's probably never been a part of an organization where a leader encouraged her to speak up and that she had ever done that, where she had really kind of challenged authority. She didn't do it perfectly. She didn't do it great, but she did it pretty well. And I think it was a start in moving. And what I want to train them to do is to learn to have those feedback loops where they're listening to other students and getting that negative feedback, but also they're passing it along to me and their willingness to speak out. So in that context, I want to get into what does it mean to merit grace by obeying our conscience? And do we merit grace when we have an invincibly erroneous conscience and we obey it? So first of all, what does it mean to merit grace? A lot of times Protestants are really critical of Catholicism with this whole idea of meriting grace. They say it's earning our salvation. The reality is we don't earn our salvation. The salvation is the free gift of God. It's gratuitous. So by the merits of Jesus Christ, by his passion, cross, his death, and his resurrection, he earns our salvation by his sacrifice, by his atoning sacrifice. We accept that gift of salvation through a relationship with him, through faith. When we accept it, faith, hope, and love, we open our intellect, our memory, and our will, and we surrender to God. But the powerful thing is that as we do that more and more, as we surrender more and more to the gift of God's grace, we merit an increase in grace. So what happens is our capacity to receive God's love and receive his divine gift is stretched and it grows. The more that we surrender, the more that we perform meritorious actions and we respond to the initial gift of God's grace. So the difference is in Protestantism, there's the one-time gift of grace and it's kind of complete. It's done. It's one and done. And they would talk about a gift of growth and sanctification, but for them, it's not really tied with this idea of meriting grace. So we say faith and works. So in that context, the question then becomes, when we're in error, do we grow? And what I would say is that's how we can understand meriting grace, is our capacity to grow, our growth in our relationship with Jesus Christ. And this is accompanied by, a deeper harmony within, a deeper sense of self, a deeper sense of God's mercy, a deeper surrender, trust, faith, hope, and love, and an ordering of our emotions, a healing of our passions and our emotions. All of this takes place when we merit grace and we increase the gift of God's grace. And it's not that God's grace is more, that we receive more of God's grace. It's our capacity to receive. So let's get into the work, and then I'm going to give another example to kind of flesh this out. So this is page 26. It's the Mediatrix Press's translation of the Moral Theology of St. Alphonsus Ligouri, page 26. We say, someone that has an invincibly erroneous conscience not only does not sin by acting according to it, but even that he is held to follow it at any time. The reasoning of each is that he does not sin, because although the action may not be right in itself, nevertheless it is right according to the conscience of the one who does the act. At any time one is held to act according to it if his conscience, which is the proximate rule, so suggests it must be done. So an invincibly erroneous conscience is one that we're not aware of our error. Our conscience is telling us to do something and we're not aware of it. Now keep in mind, always with St. Alphonsus Ligouri, the closer we are to divine law and the closer we are to natural law, the less likely we can have an invincibly erroneous conscience. So for example, if our conscience is telling us to have sex before marriage and to use contraception, that would be a violation of what should be our understanding that sex is for marriage and unites a man and a woman and is for the procreation of children. That's closer to the natural law, according to most moral theologians. But let's get further away. I want to use this case. I want to use the case of somebody who thinks that their boss is stealing or that their boss is breaking the law somehow at work, and they feel called to be a whistleblower. Let's say they're wrong about that, but they don't know that they're wrong, and they do have some evidence, they have some foundation for it. What he would say is, even if they're wrong, they should always obey their conscience. In fact, what he would say is if they don't do something about it, if they think something is wrong and they don't do anything about it, they've in fact sinned because they're not obeying their conscience. Even if it comes out that they were in fact, that their conscience was wrong. So the question now becomes, do you grow when you do that? So do you grow if you obey your conscience and it's wrong? Not only does one that performs an act with an invincibly erroneous conscience not sin, but even more probably he merits grace. The reason is because to say some act is good, or at least neutral, suffices that one is directed by the dictate of reason and prudence. Therefore, since the one doing the work acts prudently, there ought to be little doubt about the good end for which it is worked, namely the glory of God, or charity towards one neighbor, just as, on the other hand, someone that performs a good work, yet supposed it to be evil on account of an evil end, for which he carries out the work, would lose merit. So the fascinating thing in that situation, somebody thinks their boss is breaking the law. If they don't turn him in, they're sinning and they lose merit. If they turn him in, or they bring it to light and they're wrong and that's discovered, they're still obeying their conscience and they're still doing, relatively speaking, what's right. Going back to the example with the student and leadership, I think it was a powerful example for me, is that I think this is a powerfully profound and practical teaching that we need to have in every organization. And that is, you have to encourage people to speak up even when they're wrong. I think most leaders do not do this. And hold me to this. I know one day somebody's going to come to me and say, Father, you said to speak up. And maybe it's going to be me, the one who's in the hot seat, that somebody's calling to question my intentions and my actions. And what I would say is, it's always better to act according to your conscience. That's what, and you always grow. So for the student in leadership, I'll be honest with you, not every critique she had was perfectly put. I didn't agree with everything. Neither did the rest of leadership. But in her willingness to speak out, she grew as an individual. And I would say ultimately she grew in her relationship with the Lord. So obey your conscience. That's what we got to do. We got to instill that in young people. That courageousness, that willingness, even if there's negative consequences, whatever it might be, that willingness to obey our conscience. Father Ian, thanks for listening.